the Ukrainians are targeting differently as well. They've been using the rocket drones or the longer-range drones to go deeper and deeper into Russian territory, going after more and more sensitive energy infrastructure, and we're now in a situation where roughly 60% of the Russian transport system for oil that matters is under the gun. The Russians are taking hits, not just in the refineries anymore, but also their ports. We had a number of Ukrainian drones strike out at a place called Tuapse, which is one of the two major ports on the Black Sea. Tuapse is important because it serves as an outlet not just for Russian but Kazakh crude, and the Ukrainians didn't simply hit the pipe control system, didn't simply hit the loading berth, they also hit at least 2, perhaps as many as 4 of the tankers that were there. Now, we don't have damage reports because the Russians don't talk. The tankers carry Black Sea crude at this point are pretty much all shadow vessels, so they're not registered with normal law enforcement internationally, so they're not talking either. But Tuapse, one of the 4 largest offloading facilities in the Russian system, even partially offline, that's kind of a big economic hit, and it's a lot closer than some of the targets in Bashkortostan or Tatarstan that the Ukrainians have already proven to they can hit. So they actually have the possibility of taking this one offline if they hit it hard enough and repeatedly enough, and the Ukrainians are showing a penchant for hitting the same target over and over and over until it's just not in the equation anymore. This would be the first major port that the Russians would have lost, the Shadow Fleet vessels. Now, part of what makes them a Shadow Fleet is that they are underinsured or not insured at all. And in that sort of scenario, the financial risk is not borne by the international community. Part of the way the sanctions work, especially as designed by the Europeans, is that they're no longer providing maritime insurance for the vessels that dock at Russian ports. So they have to be off the ledger. They get insurance from, say, the Russian government, the Chinese government, the Indian government, instead of normal things like, say, Lloyd's. And that means that the financial risk is not assumed by the international community, but instead by these specific governments. Now, we have not had a shadow tanker sunk yet. We've had some confiscated, and that happened in the Baltic Sea a few weeks ago. But we not actually had one sunk, but now we have the Ukrainians deliberately targeting multiple shadow tankers. And sooner or later, one of them is going to go down, and when that happens, it's going to be really interesting to see how the payout happens. Because if the Russians or the Indians or the Chinese don't pay up, then all this insurance is null and void, and then the shadow tankers are basically a free-for-all if you happen to be anyone else who doesn't like the Russians. And we'll probably see mass confiscations. If the Ukrainians, the Indians, or the Russians do pay out, then the Ukrainians have every interest in hitting as many tankers as possible to cause as large as a financial loss to the supporters of the Russian system. Because for the Ukrainians, there's absolutely no downside to hitting the tanker. There may have been a year or 2 ago. Because back then, the concern of the White House was that high oil prices were going to impact the Democrats' chances of elections. But now, Trump really doesn't care about economic damage with any of his policies, so why would this one be any different? And we're now in a massive oversupply situation for crude on a global basis. We're probably somewhere in the realms of 2 to 4 million barrels a day too much crude, which means that if it wasn't for all the risk premiums out there, political, geopolitical, military, or otherwise, we'd probably already have an oil price crash, which means that the world can get by with substantially less Russian crude than it thinks that it needs. It's all adding up for a lot more direct action from the Ukrainians on all Russian energy targets. And I think the Shadow Fleet is where we need to watch the most closely.